Welcome back to Empire of the Sun. Tonight we are going to start an after-action report. And because this is a campaign and I'm going to do a fair amount of analysis, we'll spread this over several sessions. I play the allies here, and so you'll definitely get more in-depth discussion from that perspective. But unfortunately, my opponent is Antero Kusi, who's a world-class player, and so folks will not walk away disappointed or empty-handed on the Japanese side for sure. The game's still ongoing, and it's been a total blast. There's some interesting things that have happened that you wouldn't normally see in the same game. The fortunes of war have also sort of swung back and forth in a fairly wild and woolly fashion. So it's been really very tense right from the beginning, and we've had a blast. I think you'll enjoy this, and for the new folks, I hope you'll learn something along the way as well. So to get started, what we should do is probably take a quick look at the current situation as we're going to start. And what I'm going to do here is, again, I tend to think of the mid-game as turns sort of 4 through 7 or so. And there's a transition point from the opening to the mid-game that occurs usually in turn 3. And so we'll kind of look at how the opening occurred here by showing you sort of what happened on turn 2 and then how turn 3 kind of transitioned into the mid-game in turn 4. And for those who didn't have an opportunity to look at the earlier video on playing the allies, I'll just comment that the major factor that launches the mid-game in my mind and sort of pins it to turn 4 is the fact that the allies at that point have to start making progress of war. And so that really changes everything from an ally perspective. You'll notice over here on the turn track that the game turn marker is set to turn 3. This is actually the very start of turn 3. The highlighted units, so the blue highlighting on the Allied units and the red highlighting on the Japanese units, shows a mix of the reinforcements and replacements that have come on right now at the beginning of turn 3. And to just recap turn 2 very quickly, the Japanese had 2 military events and 14 card activations. And what I mean by card activations is the activations that come with the card. So not counting any HQ activations, but just looking at the logistics value of a military event card or the OC value of an ops card, and looking at those that were actually played for either military events or ops. The Japanese had 2 events and 14 card activations, not counting what they put into the FO. And because it was a fairly weak hand, they pursued the weak hand air superiority strategy in the DEI. And so let's just turn on the air ZOIs here so you can get a sense of kind of where the Japanese are. They locked down the DEI, and they managed to shut out ABDA. But no countries actually fell, so the DEI hasn't fallen yet. You can see there are still several resource hexes that need to be taken, or at least, well, there's 2, and then there's Chilatja. So the Philippines did not fall. Malaya is still alive, and the DEI is still here. You'll notice that MacArthur actually was withdrawn, and he was brought in back here. The allies were placed into ISR, but overall it was a fairly weak hand for the Japanese, and they played a fairly typical opening there to really just get air ZOIs over all the ports and essentially lock the allies out from being able to bring any reinforcements into the DEI. If you look here in the Pacific, you'll see that the Japanese were able to take Guadalcanal, and so with Rabaul and Guadalcanal, they controlled the Solomons. They did not take much on the northern side of New Guinea. They basically landed at Biak and out of Sarong, but all of the bases here on northern New Guinea are still under Allied control. So the Japanese obviously would like to try and take those out in turn 3. You'll notice just in terms of reinforcements that most of the Allied forces obviously came in down here. And that's pretty much where we are at the start of turn 3. So let's take a really quick look at how turn 3 unfolded. The Japanese played an initial card over in the DEI, which enabled the Allies to take a shot at Bougainville. If you notice here, these are the Japanese ZOIs, and there's nothing over the Central Solomons. And so with no unit there and no ZOI there was no possibility for a Japanese reaction. So basically, the Allies were able, in the early going of turn 3, to make a grab there and ultimately to get some Australian air in there for support, and also to get a naval unit there to create a solid position. That's a good early move for the Allies if they can make it. If you've got a free shot at it, grab it. The main reason for doing that is that once the Allies have their own ZOI established in the Central Solomons, the Central Pacific HQ, Nimitz can trace all the way over to New Guinea, both for supply and activation purposes. And in particular for activation, it's nice to be able to activate as many units as you can if you've got a card that favors the Central Pacific. And so being able to reach further is a good thing. And ultimately, actually, Central Pacific will be able to reach all the way over to BIAC, but not until these ZOIs here are cleared out. So grabbing a base in Bougainville was an early play for the Allies, and was probably the centerpiece of their turn, just in terms of the fact that turn 3 is a turn where you do whatever you can and don't expect too much, but if you can accomplish something, that's great. And so that was that, and then the Allies also pushed in, and these were, as you'll recall, the northern New Guinea ports were ports that the Japanese had never taken, and so the Allies actually were able to get a little bit of power projected there to basically defend those ports. The other thing that happened in this turn, which really has set the tone for the whole game going forward, is that the Japanese once again had some very poor cards offensively, and so although they were certainly able to complete the conquest of the DEI, that was actually their only national conquest in turn 3, which is fairly unusual. But they did have and took advantage of 3 War in Europe cards. So their first War in Europe card took it down here. They had a major. Their second War in Europe card took it down here. And once you're at this point, this is where you actually lose, as the Allies, your amphibious shipping point replacement. So that's a big deal. And then the Japanese actually were able to play a third War in Europe card that took War in Europe all the way down to the red territory, which is where the Allies start to lose a card. And they lose a card every turn as long as they're down there. So while the Japanese were really slow starting as a result of their poor offensive cards, this play of War in Europe all the way down to the -7 level in turn 3 really sets up the whole tone of the game and will make things quite interesting, as you'll see going forward. Let's take a quick look here at the opening of turn 4 in terms of reinforcements and replacements. Those are the highlighted units here. So from an Allied perspective, putting some corps forward to defend key bases. So there's the Australian Corps there, and actually you'll notice over here that a number of everything's delayed obviously because of War in Europe, but a number of turn 3 reinforcements were actually sent to Europe. A couple of them weren't, and folks like the Commonwealth, for example, can't be, but in this case, so the Commonwealth is here. The 11th Air Force was not sent to Europe. Here's another Air Force, 13th Air Force, that was not sent to Europe. Then we've got finally a Marine Division and an additional carrier and battleship there. We've got the 1st Corps here, which was already on board but was replaced up to full strength. So that will be a good defender of that port so that the Marine Brigade can go off and do more offensive things. And then there was a replacement to the Lexington down here. So that's the Allied reinforcements and replacements in the Pacific. They got a couple of reinforcements over in the CBI as well. You'll note that because, again, things have been slow for the Japanese, the Rangoon offensive hasn't really gotten untracked yet. Actually, this army took a step loss to an air attack towards the end of last turn. And the Japanese reinforcements, there's an air unit here at Sarang. There's an army there at Saipan, which actually, I think that's wrong. That should come in as a half-strength army. And there's another air unit over here at Marcus. So that's the starting point of the turn. A couple of other things to take note of. because we're down in the bottom tier of war in Europe, the Allies did not get an amphibious shipping point reinforcement this turn. So instead of being at 3 on turn 4, which is where they normally would be, we're at 2. There's a downside to that, obviously. The upside is that we only need to make 2 progress of war this turn, not 3. So we've got a little bit easier row to hoe there. But the other thing is we lost a card. Because we're all the way down here in the -7 red territory, the Allies lose a card. And so we're actually only going to have 6 cards to start this turn. We don't have a future offensive card at this point. I'm sure there was a good reason why I didn't play something to FO on turn 3. At this point, I can't remember what it was. But normally you would always want to place a card in FO so that you don't get into a situation where the other players got 1 or 2 plays at the end that you can't respond to at all. And so anyway, normally you would want to have a card in FO. The fact that I don't here means I had something that I wanted to do last turn that was important, and I will potentially pay the price for it this turn. Let's take a look at the cards we actually drew. So this was the Allied hand as initially drawn for this turn. So we've got Imperial HQ debate. So this puts the Japanese into ISR, and which they are not right now. So this will be useful, we hope. And equally importantly, this is a draw 1 strategy card. There are 2 kinds of draws. Most draws are reaction draws. So you'll see here the skip bombing attack is a reaction card that also allows a draw. But there are a few cards on each side, mainly the ISR cards, that are offensive draws, meaning you play the card offensively and you also get to draw a card, which actually increases your overall operation total for the hand. If you think about reaction cards, they don't increase, the draw there doesn't increase your offensive total for the hand because you're playing that card in reaction. So you're basically giving up a potential offensive to play it in reaction, but you're getting a strategy card in return. So the number of offensives that you can run, or the number of cards that you can play offensively, stays the same. But with an offensive draw like the ISR card, you actually play an offensive and get another card back. So it gives you potentially an extra card at the end of the turn to play against the other guy. Each side also has another card that can be played offensively. And oddly enough, I've drawn 2 here in one hand, which is rather unusual. But this new sub-doctrine basically is a great card for the Allies because it essentially shuts down the Japanese escort bonuses for the strategic sub-roll. And it so you play it, essentially you play it offensively as the event, but you also get to draw a strategy card for it. So it's an offensive draw, just like Imperial HQ debate. The Japanese have a similar card. It's the Panama Canal card. And the fact that I've drawn 2 in this hand is actually quite lucky, simply because I'm down a card anyway, and I also didn't have an FO card, so I'm going to get 2 extra cards that I wouldn't have any right to count on just by random luck here. And then I've also got the skip bombing attack, which is a nice card. It's a reaction card that has the primary effect of actually reducing the Japanese ASP total by 1 permanently. It's got a bonus if there's some combat going on, but the primary impact is to reduce the ASP total, and it's also a draw 1 strategy card. So we'll be able to play this in reaction and replace it with another card. We've got 2 potential offensives. This one's kind of nice in the sense that it's a 1 OC, so it's going to be short range, but right now that's actually good for us, and we'll take a look at how we might use it. It's short range, which means that the Japanese won't have too much opportunity to react to it, but it does have a nice 3 logistics value. It has to be used with Southwest HQ, but and it has some limitations on who it can activate, but it is a nice card. And then this is an air offensive. Only air units can be activated, but it's also good for trying to bomb Rabaul, for example, or do something with the air units that the Allies now have in the Solomons, New Guinea area. And then just thinking about what we might play as an FO card, China Airlift is a likely FO card simply because in the CBI right now, things haven't really gotten cranked up yet. So there's really no rush to play the hump. This is the card that you definitely want to play as the Allies. You want to play it as the event to open the hump, because the hump can't be opened without this, but we don't need to play that right now, so it's a great card to put into FO, and we definitely want to put a card into FO this turn. And as we look at our cards here, the other thing we also want to be thinking about, obviously, is how we're going to make progressive war. I pointed out that with only 2 ASPs, we just need to take 2 progressive war hexes, and one of the first things, and this is actually a great aspect of the Vassal module, which you can't take advantage of when you're playing with the physical game, is it nicely shows you air ZOIs. And so you can immediately notice that New Georgia is an opportunity to grab a progressive war hex that is not under a ZOI. The challenge with COIs is they'll give the Japanese an opportunity for a special reaction. We could potentially grab any one of these bases here that aren't occupied, but the air unit at Rabaul, actually it's a CVL, provides the opportunity to roll for special reaction, whereas here in New Georgia, we can grab this without any chance for special reaction. So we look at that and know immediately that we'll want to grab that as one progressive war if we can, and then we'll look at other opportunities, but one of these might be a likely shot just because needing a special reaction, it will make it tougher for the Japanese to be able to stop us. Since the Allies failed at their sub-roll on this turn, the Japanese end up with 7 cards, and with 7 to 6, they automatically go first. As their first operation, they play Western Force, which is one of the 3 fun cards that involves paratroopers. They activated the 7th Air Division here at Sarong and used those paratroopers to grab Hollandia here, so this has become Japanese controlled. And they also took the 35th Army and marched it overland from Sarong to Vogelkap to capture that resource hex. In addition, the 14th Army marched down and took Manila with some support actually from the CVL at Palau, and the 38th Army marched down the Malayan Peninsula to take Singapore with support from the CVL at Davao. You'll notice in both cases what the Japanese did was they moved the CVL into the battle hex. There was really no possibility for Allied reaction here, and the CVL by itself in the battle hex actually provides a +4 modifier, +2 for naval supremacy and +2 for air supremacy. So what that does is in both of these battles, basically, if the Japanese get a 1/2 times result, which would normally be a 30% chance, they'll fail to inflict any damage, and so therefore they would lose the combat. But with a +4 modifier offsetting, and actually it would get worse because it's a 30% normally, but then there's a modifier resulting from the mixed terrain, and so it would be not so good for the Japanese without air and naval support, but with the CVLs present and the +4, that offsets the -2 and provides a net of +2. So what that does is basically gives the Japanese a 90% chance to be successful in those combats in both cases. And it's just one army marching over land and a CVL that accomplishes that. Then for my first card, I decided to go ahead and play ISR on the Japanese. So the Japanese, let's go ahead, and you'll notice one cool thing in the module is you can flip this, but if you go up here and click on this toggle here, it not only flips that counter there, but it flips all of the HQs as well. So use this as the Japanese ISR toggle and this as the US ISR toggle, and you'll be in good shape when you're using the module here. So we go ahead and we say play as event, and then you'll notice I've actually pulled the draws that I got. So you'll see a card came over, and in fact the draw for that card was a very cool card, which is Operation Vengeance, and that provides the nice benefit that Combined Fleet Yamamoto, which is normally a 13-3, is replaced by Ozawa, who's only a 12-2. So we'll look forward to playing that as the event at some point during the turn as well. At this point, for their second card, the Japanese play Tokyo Rose. That's one of the cards that provides a political will impact. So the U.S. political will goes down by 1. Remember, it started at +8 after Pearl Harbor. It went down by 1 when the DEI fell, and it's just gone down by another 1 due to Tokyo Rose, and because Philippines and Malaya have both fallen this turn. At the end of the turn, it will also go down another 2, but those effects are not felt until after the national status segment at the end. On their third card, the Japanese finally get their CBI offensive cranked up, and what happens is we've got the 15th Army that moved 1 hex forward here. We've got another army which moved 1 hex up from Bangkok. We've got the elite air unit that's in Bangkok that's going to be supporting this battle here. So battle A is in this hex right here. So there's air cover coming from the elite air in battle A. And then the 6th Air Division, which is a non-elite air unit, is actually going to attack Rangoon at long range. This is a good example of pinning. The idea is the Japanese doesn't want me to be able to react with any of the larger corps that are sitting in Rangoon. He just wants to stomp on this division here. And so by attacking Rangoon with this air unit, he's effectively pinning those units. So we've created 2 battle hexes here. In reaction, what happens is the SEAC air moves over from Akyab to Mandalay to fight in battle A. So that's 2 hex range, so that's normal range. And the CV comes down from Madras to also get within 2 hexes of battle A. So there'll be 20 for the Japanese and 20 for the Allies in air naval in battle A. Then what happens is the Warspite comes down from Calcutta to join in at Rangoon, and you'll notice that there's also the AVG air group there, and so that will be good because this is an air unit that's attacking from range. If it were only the Warspite on its own, it wouldn't be able to damage that air unit. But you have to remember that defensive units in the hex, even if they aren't activated, will still defend, and so the American Volunteer Air Group will get to fight, and it will contribute to air parity, and it will enable the 2 units combined to damage that air unit if they can hit it. So what happens in the 2 air attacks here, just really quickly, is that the Japanese roll pretty well in this attack. They get a 1x result. That will flip the CV here. Remember, the Japanese would always like to do damage against particularly the Commonwealth naval units because they get very few replacements. And there's so many air replacements that wherever possible, the Japanese want to damage naval, and especially Commonwealth naval, as opposed to air. The Commonwealth misses in return, but in Battle B, both air units end up getting flipped. This guy gets flipped here, and the volunteer group gets flipped there. Then this guy gets stomped all over in the ground combat. So remember, if you look, you'll notice he's got that little yellow circle up there, so he can't be replaced. So we're just going to delete him rather than putting him in the dead pool. And I don't want to forget to mention that in reaction to that offensive, I do go ahead and use it as an opportunity to play the skip bombing attack. I really want to make sure that I can draw a strategy card. I'm not sure that there will necessarily be an opportunity to take advantage of the bonus at any point. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab the ASP and grab my draw here. So we basically play that as the event, which means it's going to be removed from play. And you'll notice that my draw for that is Operation Stalemate over here, which is another nice offensive card. At this point, I really want to grab New Georgia before he does anything here that might defend it. At this point, he would have to fly in some other air to cover it, but it's something that he might possibly do. And so I just use my 1 card, and actually, as you'll see, because I'm basically just taking this Marine Brigade here, which was sitting at Bougainville, and they're basically just sort of paddling across to New Georgia there. That's actually the only unit that I chose to activate there. So it didn't really matter whether I played that card as an OC card or an event card in this particular case. So we're just going to play it for our operations, and we take New Georgia, and we spent 1 amphibious shipping point out of our 2 to do that, and we've also managed to take 1 of our 2 progress of war that we need. At this point, the Japanese play a 2 OC card. They move an army up towards Rangoon here. The 28th Army moves north 1 hex, and they also send by AA this army up here. Note that The definition of AA is such that if you are not moving to a friendly port, it counts as amphibious assault. This is obviously a Japanese occupied hex, so it's maybe not what you would traditionally think of as an amphibious assault, but by rules definitions, if you're moving to a friendly port, you don't need amphibious shipping points. If you're not moving to a friendly port, you do need amphibious shipping points, and it's considered amphibious assault. And so that was an amphibious assault that took 2 ASPs. And we now have 3 armies getting ready to bang on the door at Rangoon. The other thing the Japanese did was they moved a reduced army from Balikpapan over to Palau here to begin to defend these bases. And at this point, it could get interesting to think about attacking the the 3 Japanese armies that are stacked there because they don't have any immediate air cover. But in looking at the Allied hand, there's not a lot of opportunity here. The best card probably would be Operation Stalemate over here because this card is limited to air units only. If we run with Operation Stalemate, it's 4 on SEAC, which would give us 5 activations. The challenge there is it's a 5 intel number, which by itself isn't too bad, but because if we bring naval units, which we'd like to because, for example, the Warspite is 14. Anybody that moves into that hex is going to trigger the ZOI threshold and will give them a -2 bonus. So that'll mean that on a 7 or less, they'll be able to intercept. And they also haven't played an intercept card yet in the turn. So if I really wanted to pull an intercept card, that might possibly be a place to do it. But they might also just bank on an 80% chance that they could roll it. So in this particular situation, I didn't choose to go for that just because the odds didn't seem particularly good. Instead, we went ahead and I played Operation Vengeance over here, which basically, in this case, I decided, and this is sort of where you play along with the cards. Clearly, the war in Europe was going extremely well. The Japanese had been playing defensively in the Pacific while the Germans were making hay in Europe, and so we decided that there must have been quite a bit of cooperation going on between the Japanese and the Germans, and maybe what happened was Yamamoto actually tried to make a trip to Berlin, and somehow the intel cracked the code and he was intercepted on the way and just pulled off the train somewhere, or perhaps shot down somewhere. In any event, Yamamoto is gone. This is played as an event, and so if we look here, what that means is we're going to go up and there's a nice little spot where you can click here. It says replace with Ozawa, and we'll have to flip him. But now combined fleet is only a 12-2. And one of the things that means is that if you look at the range, if you hit Control-C, you can see the range of any HQ that you have selected. And at a range of 12, Atu-Kiska is no longer in supply from combined fleet. So that starts to create some challenges for the Japanese. Another important effect of the combined fleet range, if you look here, is that Truk, Eniwetok, and Biak are no longer within range of combined fleet, which means that if the Allies go for any of those 3 major bases, combined fleet won't be able to react. It'll have to be a South Seas reaction. At this point, the Japanese play General Adachi as an event for their next card, and they move their Rangoon offensive forward. The 3 armies that were just outside of Rangoon move into the hex, and a couple of elite air divisions move up from Miri and the Philippines to support that attack. On the Allied side, the Allies are able to react, which is a fairly high probability on the die roll there. And then they move the Chinese in from Mandalay. The FE Air comes in from Dhaka to join the SEAC Air that was already in Akiab, and Warspite comes down from Calcutta. It's actually in the Rangoon hex. I've just left it outside here to make it easier to see. So what we've got in the air naval is the Japanese have what looks like 42, but you'll notice they're actually at long range. They're at 3 hexes, which for Army Air is long range, so they're going to be halved. So they're actually at 21, and the Allies have got 36. And what happens is that both sides roll a 1 times result, which basically means that the Japanese here are going to completely lose 1 elite air division, and they'll have to flip the other. And the Allies are going to take losses to their air units. And you'll notice in the battle hex that the American Volunteer Group is there, but it's already flipped. So it can't take any more damage at this point until everybody else has been flipped. The Japanese don't really have enough to do that. They've basically just got 21, so they could choose to either flip the Warspite or flip both of the full-strength air units up here. So what they did was they chose to flip the 2 full-strength air units. What happens here in the ground attack is that actually the Allies roll relatively well, and although the Japanese outnumber them, there are 4 steps on each side. And what happens is normally the loser is the side who takes the most step casualties in ground combat, and if the number of casualties is tied, then the defender wins and holds on to the hex. So because there's 4 on each side, the defender holds the hex, the Japanese have to retreat. So overall, it's fairly bloody for the Japanese, having lost 3 air steps and 4 ground steps. The Allies have lost 4 ground steps as well, but the elite air is a really nice bonus. And that's one of the challenges as the Japanese is ultimately you have to commit your elite air to combat, and when you do, there's a chance that the Allies will defeat it. And as you start to lose those steps over the course of the game, that fragile air eventually sort of disappears on you. So this is the position after post-battle movement where all of my air and naval have returned to their original locations, and the Japanese are over here in Tarakan, the surviving elite air unit. And it's now over to me for a next play, and one of the things that I forgot to mention was that in that early Western Force offensive, this air unit down here, which had started at Sarong, used its paratroopers to take the Hollandia hex and actually post-battle moved into that hex there. And so that's basically a unit that's now holding that hex, preventing the Allies from just walking into it. But if you look at air ZOIs, what that does is it leaves Amboina, which, by the way, is sort of the mace, or at least at one point was kind of the mace capital of the world if you're up on spice trivia. But it leaves Amboina uncovered by a ZOI. So I've been thinking about that for a while as a likely second candidate to grab for Progress of War. And so as I look at my next move here and trying to think what I want to do, I'm still thinking very much about China Airlift going into FO at some point. And that will happen a little bit later. But I'm thinking, let me draw one more strategy card here and see what we've got to play out the rest of the turn, because this will be my last draw. And again, it's a nice offensive draw. So we're going to go ahead and play this as the event. And you'll see that what happens here is I draw a War in Europe card, which is quite nice because even though this is still 1942, it's a minor, so it's worth 1 in either 42 or 43. But at this point, 1 is all I need to get up out of losing a card. And so I'm really hoping that the Japanese don't have another War in Europe card to play. Because if I can play mine and get out of deep red, then I'll at least get my card back next turn. At this point, I decide to go ahead and play Black Day, and I'm going to play it as the event. And you notice it says any HQ and the logistics value is 6, but only air units can be activated. So we play that as the event, and I want to activate the Australians, and so I'm going to use ANZAC to do that. So I get 7 activations with ANZAC. Remember, I'm under ISR, so I can only activate either Army or Navy, but this is all Army Air here, and even under ISR, ANZAC can still activate Australian units along with U.S. units of one type or the other. So we've got 7 units here, and what I'm actually doing is I'm avoiding moving into the ZOI of the Rabaul air unit. So everybody is basically, these folks are staying where they are. And essentially these 2 air units, because they're longer range, they can move up and be within their normal range but still be outside of ZOI. So basically I would have on this one a 40% chance of surprise, and I should be able to smash the 2 naval units at Rabaul pretty handily. He, however, goes ahead and plays a weather on this. And you might look at it and say, well, all right, why would you play a weather on something like that? Really good question. Was my question too. As it turns out, the card he had played into FO was another weather card, Halsey's Typhoon. So there's really not much, normally you'd think, well, especially for the Allies on turn 4, there's probably not going to be much that you'd want to weather, so that would be a logical thing to play into FO, and he did. He just happened to have 2 weather cards, so that was a good spot to use it, and so that particular attack went nowhere. Fortunately, it used up a weather card early in the game, which is always great, but it was a little annoying not to kill those units. At this point, the Japanese are actually down to their last card on this turn, and you'll notice that things have really turned around quite a bit because I've still got 3 cards left. That was a function of 2 things. One was getting a double offensive draw that turn, which is really unusual, coupled with the Japanese having a reaction play that doesn't get a draw, which was that weather card. So even though initially I was concerned that I might end up with difficulties at the end of the turn, that turn happened to just work out well for me because of the luck of the cards. So this is the Japanese play at the end. They're actually pushing these 2 elite air divisions out from Nagoya to cover open spots, and this reduced strength army is coming out from Tokyo to cover any WETOC to prevent me from trying any silly grab at that. So that is the last Japanese play. At that point, what we'll do here is we're going to go ahead and play this as the FO card. And to do that, so let me just show you here in what you do in the, let's come over and actually I guess I'm not sure where the FO card went, or the FO counter went, but normally if you put this, you can flip it. And when you flip it like that, you're actually seeing it the way I see it, which is because it's my card, I can actually see the text on the card here. When I flip it like that and send this to the other player can't see the text on the card. He only sees the card flipped over. And if you put the actual counter, the FO counter, on top of it and get it to click in the lower left corner, that will prevent the other player from being able to flip it back over. Anyway, so we play that as our FO card here, and then we have 2 cards left. So the next thing we're going to do is, it doesn't really matter which order we play these in. As it happened, I saved War in Europe till last, but let's just get that out of the way quickly. So by playing that as the event, it's going to remove it from play, but what that will do is it's going to move us up here, so we know, because at this point he has no more cards, we know that we're going to be good. We'll be out of lose a card territory. And then the last card we're going to play is Operation Stalemate, and that is good with any HQ, 6 for the Central Pacific or 4 for any other. So activating Operation Stalemate, you'll recall that we still have 1 amphibious shipping point and we still need to make 1 progress of war. I wouldn't normally save progress of war until the last card of the turn, but this particular hand just happened to evolve that way. And so what I'm doing here is I'm actually activating Anzac, because with 4 plus the 1 for Anzac, I can activate 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to activate the 3rd New Zealand, and if we look at ZOIs, you can see he's got to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He can avoid all of the Japanese ZOIs and get there in 10, and because it's a 3OC, he'd actually have 15 if he wanted it, but he doesn't need it. So we'll play that as the event, and so he'll go up and snag Amboina as the 2nd progress of war. Because he's a division, he only uses 1 ASP. And then what I've done is, again, I've activated in this case, just the short range air that are ringing Rabaul. Nobody's moving, so we're not triggering the ZOI bonus for intel. This one is at a 3 hex range, so he's halved, so I've got 35. But the good news is that if you look at these 2 units here, so the first thing I'm going to have to do is the first hit will have to go on Mogami, because I can't hit Junyo until Mogami's been hit as well. But if I get a half result, 35 halved is 17.5. That'll round up to 18. So if I get a half result, I'm still going to be able to flip Mogami and kill the Junyo. So that'll be nice. I've got just enough factors to do that. As it turns out, the Japanese roll a 9 for intel here, which fails, which means this is surprise, so there's a +3. And so both of these units get wiped out, and there's no opportunity to fire back. And so that's actually kind of nice, because with those guys gone, this one can actually be replaced, so we'll send him to the dead pool. Mogami, you'll notice, because of the pre-war yellow circle, Mogami can't be replaced, so Mogami we're just going to delete. And what that's going to mean actually is, at this point, there's no ZOI. This is the last play of the turn. There's no ZOI over Rabaul. And I do have a ZOI over Rabaul, so he's out of supply. So in attrition, whoops, that was really interesting how that worked. I have no idea how Mogami magically came back after I deleted him. This guy is going to flip, which is kind of nice, because at a full strength, the 6-6 has a really good shot at putting hurt on a Marine division that's invading an amphibious assault. But as a 3-6, he's got much less chance of doing significant damage. So that's a good deal to get that guy reduced, and he can't be built back up here. So that effectively is the end of that turn. And just to play out the end, the other piece of attrition that happened was this guy up here goes away because he's out of supply as well. So we have to send him to the dead pool. And if we go over to progress of war, both Malaya and the Philippines were captured. So, sorry, not progress of war, political will comes down from 6 to 4 at this point. So that's pretty much the end of the 4th turn, and we'll move on to the 5th. Looking at reinforcements for turn 5, the Allies are pretty straightforward. The U.S. has got a Marine division along with a battleship that it puts into Guadalcanal, and then there's a Marine air wing that goes to Amboina to provide some air cover over there. If we look at the CBI, we've got replacements, as well as the London is a new unit, replacement to SEAC, and also a new unit here in the form of the 4th Indian Corps. So we're trying to beef up the defense a little bit here, but it's questionable whether we'll be able to hang on to Rangoon. We'll have to see what happens. The Japanese had lost, obviously, a bunch of steps last turn. We both did in this battle, and so they've taken 2 divisions out of China here to beef up these 2 armies from reduced to full strength there. And then there's an air unit here, another air unit down at Kavieng, and a reduced 33rd Army that goes into Ulithi. An interesting question you might be asking yourself is why the Japanese would put the air unit at Kavieng rather than Rabaul, and actually they couldn't put it at Rabaul. The reason being, let's just move it out of the way here for a second. If we look at what the ZOIs were at the time that reinforcements were being placed, you can see that there are Allied ZOIs all over here and no Japanese ZOIs in this area to neutralize them. So basically, the Japanese couldn't put any reinforcement or replacement into Rabaul, but they did have Kavieng as an option. So this unit here went to Kavieng. Let's talk a little bit about progress of war, and before we even draw cards, quick look at how we think we might make progress of war this turn. Remember, if we go over here to the War in Europe track, we're actually up out of the -7 territory. That's great, because as long as we're not in red, then we're not losing a card. We're still going to lose our amphibious shipping point reinforcement here, but the advantage of that is we're still only going to have to make 2 progress of war. Normally, by now on turn 5, we'd be in a point where we were having to make 4 progress of war, and we'll only have to make 2. So let's see if we can figure out where those might come from if we put up the ZOIs again. The first thing you'll notice is, and actually, let's go back and let me just take 1 second and talk a little bit about last turn, because I think I sort of mentioned in passing that the way the turn had unfolded, I ended up not taking my last progress of war, my second one and last one, until very late in the turn, in fact, the last card, and that normally wouldn't be the case. I just want to reiterate that last turn in particular, it was relatively straightforward because I knew that I had a really good shot at grabbing New Georgia here. And actually, on their first card play, the Japanese had moved this air unit from Sarong over to Hollandia, which had uncovered Amboina. And so I knew I had a really good shot at those two hexes as freebies. And you might wonder why the Japanese wouldn't move to cover those hexes to make it more difficult. That's a good question. The challenge is that early in the game, turn 2, 3, 4, the Japanese, in particular in this game, even still on turn 4, the Japanese were trying to move their offensive forward and trying to move as quickly as they can. And if you look at what it would take to put a couple of units down to cover ZOIs, you're basically talking about having to move units out from sort of the mid-theater that would be backfilled by units coming in from closer to home. And so you're talking about, probably because those hexes were pretty spread apart, that's at least 4 activations to do that over in this part of the world. That's, depending on what card it is, that's potentially an entire card's worth of activation, and it's at a time when you're trying to move as quickly as possible in the other part of the world. And so from a Japanese perspective, there's a lot of risk in doing that, and it's not clear that it would make sense to spend an entire card just to cover a couple of hexes. Obviously, if there was a really good shot at completely stopping progressive war and getting the extra political will for that, then that's a real trade-off, and you got to think about, are you willing to spend a card to get a political will? You probably would be. But if it's not totally clear that that the spending of that card would in fact get you that political will, then it becomes a much dicier decision. Another situation in which you might want to play late in the turn to get progressive war, or at least to get your last progressive war, would be if you've got a nice surprise card that you want to use and you want to make every effort to pull any possible reaction card that the Japanese player has in his hand before you use the surprise card. That would be another typical place to make a play for your progressive war, actually towards the end of the turn. So anyway, that's just a quick recap on last turn. If we look at this turn, you'll see we've got a similar kind of situation down here. At this point, because this air unit is back here at Kavieng and not in Raval, that leaves Woodlark uncovered, so we think we've got a good shot at probably grabbing that. And then the other one that's looking nice here is because the Japanese grabbed this last turn, remember this air unit was over here, they used paratroopers as part of their first play, and then moved like that in PBM. So at this point, that Hollandia hex is Japanese controlled. Itape still belongs to me, but Hollandia is a good target because we can march over land. We've actually got a core there, and we can march over land. There's no ground units right now to defend it. Well, whether he would put a ground unit in there or not is an interesting question. We'll see, but that feels like a pretty much no-brainer second progressive war because it doesn't actually even require an ASP to do it. Let's take a look at the cards now. This is what we've drawn. We've got 7 cards. There are 3 military events over here. We'll come back and look at those in a little more detail in a minute. Then we've got this. This is a nice resource card. It's Edwin Booz, and it's an extra ASP. We could really use that about this point, so we'll be happy to take that. Let's come back and talk a little bit more. This is a special card, so we'll talk a bit about that. This is a China event card, and we can't really play this for the event right now. If you recall, the China track, there's a rule that says that once the marker has left the stable front, it basically can't return to the stable front other than through the play of the Soviets invade Manchuria card, which is a special card which can't be played for the event right now. Anyway, we'll come back to that. But the point being that in general, other than that one special exception, the Allies can never move this marker back into stable front. And so even if the Japanese had a China event and played it to move it over this turn, we wouldn't be able to play our event to move it back into stable front. And so our Mao Zedong Communist Defensive here is going to definitely be played for a 2OC. And then we do have another War in Europe card here. It's a minor again, which is only worth 1 in 42 and 43. If we look down here, 1 will bump it up like that. That's still not out of the territory where we're losing our ASP reinforcement. So it's progress. It's not great progress, but we really have got to try and make some momentum going back the other way. So even though it's only a minor and it's still early in the game, we're going to play that as the event, I think. Let's go back and take a little bit closer look here at the military events. Operation Brewer is a nice little surprise attack card. It can only be used on MacArthur, the Southwest Pacific HQ. It's got a logistics value of 1. And it does have a bonus of MacArthur's Navy, which gives you the ability to use at least one non-CV naval unit with an Army attack. But it's always good to have a surprise attack in your hand. We'll always be happy to have one of those. Chennault is another pretty cool event. It's got really sort of two components to it. One is it's a basic air offensive. So it's got a logistics value of 4 with any HQ. Only air units can be activated. That's not too bad by itself. The bonus is that the American Volunteer Group is going to be replaced by the 14th Air Force. The American Volunteer Group cannot take replacements. The 14th Air Force, when it comes on, is able to take replacements. So we'll be happy to have that. And by the way, you can play the offensive anywhere. For example, you could play the air offensive and play it for an attack against Rabaul, let's say, and still put the 14th Air Force over in the CBI. Then there's Hurricane Task Force. That's a basic military event. It's logistics value of 4, 20C, any HQ, and we're always happy to have one of those in our hand. Let's talk briefly about Edwin Booz, because there's a little bit of strategy there around where you actually might want to, or when you might want to play him. Obviously, if you need the extra ASP to make Progress of War in the current turn, you're going to want to take it in the current turn. We're in a position where we probably don't need to. We've got 2 ASPs. We only need to make 2 Progress of War. We can make one of those over land. So we're feeling pretty comfortable. And in that situation, it might actually make sense to play Booz into the FO. The value of that is that he basically won't come on until next turn. So that means that Progress of War will be determined at the beginning of next turn based on the ASPs at that moment, which will still just be 2, because you recall we're still going to be missing, even if we manage to boost this up by 1, we're still likely to be missing our ASP replacement. So we'll still have only 2 ASPs, only need 2 Progress of War, and if we play him out of FO in the middle of the turn, we'll pick up the extra ASP without having to pay the penalty of needing an extra Progress of War to go with it. So that's pretty cool. Finally, looking at Soviets Invade Manchuria, this is one of 2 special cards in the game. It's paired with Tojo Resigns. You'll see here, it says here if Tojo has resigned, in other words, if that card has been played, then this card must be played as an event. And it basically triggers the loss of 2 resource hexes and becomes actually part of the process to enable the possibility of an A-bomb victory. And so from that perspective, it's a pretty important event. But it can't be played as an event right now because Tojo hasn't resigned yet. That card hasn't been played. So we're just going to use it as a 3OC. And it does have, when played as an OC, it has the effect of causing the deck to be reshuffled. And so we won't mind that either, because we've actually had a number of sort of special non-military events that are one-timers that got played and they're now out of the deck. And so we've got a bunch of pretty decent military events that are in the discard pile that we can shuffle back into the deck. So that's always a good thing as well. With hand size tied at 7 here, the tiebreaker in 1943 and beyond goes to the Allies. So I will be going first here. And I've got a fairly significant strategic decision to make, and that's whether or not I want to go and play my initial card offensively to try and grab Rabaul, or defensively over in the CBI. And if we look here in the CBI, you can see both of us took a lot of damage last turn. We both done some reinforcement. He's got 2 armies here, as well as more forces down here that he could start shipping up. So at some point there's going to be significant pressure again against Rangoon this turn, probably earlier rather than later. And so, a good thing to do would be to reinforce it and hope to hold out. The flip side is, it's hard to take Rabaul, and at the moment Rabaul is relatively undefended, and so a quick move might potentially do it. So that's a trade-off that you'll often be faced with in the game. Do you play offensively in one part of the world or defensively in the other. And in general, there are times when defensive play is critical. In general, I like to play offensively, but I think a lot of it also comes down to what the odds are. And so one of the things that you have to look at in a situation like this is, what chance do the Japanese have of being able to reinforce Rabaul in a way that could, or react in a way that could hold you off, either by winning the naval battle, the air naval battle, or by reinforcing and winning the ground battle. And so one of the things, if you look really just briefly here, let's see. So we've got, for example, the Japanese we're both under ISR at this point. So that means that the Japanese are not going to be able to use one of these nice big 912s to come in and reinforce Rabaul. But they could use something like this second special naval landing force over there, that naval brigade could come in. And remember, with an amphibious assault, the Japanese are going to be +3 against us. So instead of having only a 10% chance of getting a 2x result, they're going to have a 40% chance of getting a 2x result. And if I invade with a Marine division, that's going to be 12 halved to 6 on defense. And so 4 plus a 3, that's 7, with a 40% chance of a 2x result being 14. 14 is going to completely wipe out a Marine division. So I would have to assume that I'm going to lose 2 ground steps for sure, and I would have to send 2 Marine divisions to be sure of making it through. And so that really starts to look relatively unattractive. The other piece of it is we could say, well, let's go with our surprise attack. Surprise attack is always nice for a situation like that. But the challenge is, early in the turn, the other player will usually have a pretty good chance, or the Japanese anyway, if you're the Allies playing against the Japanese will have a pretty good chance of having a card that will allow them to intercept. So that even our surprise attack wouldn't be any good. In fact, with the number, he still has a lot of JN25 code changes that he hasn't used, along with a couple of other intercept cards in the form of counteroffensives. So he's definitely got a better than 50% chance of having some sort of intercept reaction card in his hand this turn. So I decide, thinking through all that even though it looks really tempting to just try and grab Rabaul, that I just can't do it at this point. It's too risky. And given that there's a good opportunity to play defensively over here that makes total sense, I go ahead and decide to take that. Looking at the cards I could use, I end up making a fairly quick decision that Soviets invade Manchuria will be good. It's nice to actually have the 30C when moving around in CBI, especially with ground units, because it allows you to move a bit more. And the others, I want to save the military events for something a little more interesting, probably. This is 20C. The war in Europe we're going to use as an event as well. So it really comes down to between the 20C and the 30C, and I decided to just go ahead and use Soviets invade Manchuria for that. So we play that as we play it for operations rather, which will cause a reshuffle. Unfortunately, it goes nowhere because I make my moves, but you'll recall that he had played, I mentioned last turn, he had actually played a second weather card, which happened to be Halsey's Typhoon, into the FO. And so he actually, at this point, decides that he's going to weather my reinforcing move at Rangoon, which is probably smart because that he immediately then gets to go and mount an offensive against Rangoon and try and take it before I can do anything else to reinforce it. He plays Hago here on south, which gives him 6 activations, and what he does with that is he moves the 2 army units from 2108 into Rangoon for the assault. He then moves this unit here up to Hanoi to attack and pin that unit there to prevent it from reinforcing the stack. And he activates this guy over here. And he actually flew him to Bangkok, and as I was prepping for this and looking at it, I realized that Bangkok is actually a bridge too far. 3 legs for that unit, the best he could do is to get to here. It would have been easy enough for these 2 units to have swapped position. That's not a big deal. But it just shows you that in the heat of battle, even two experienced players can occasionally miscount a hex path or something like that. So it's always good to keep an eye, especially when you're doing activation traces and when you're moving air units between bases. It's good to keep an eye out for yours and the other guys. And then Palembang, this reduced army moves up here to Saigon to backfill, because ultimately you don't want to leave an HQ without some kind of ground garrison, and better yet, more than that, even air and naval as well. So we've got, actually we'll just clone that, and there we go. So we've got 2 battle hexes going here. And if we look here, he can activate SEAC and 4 because it's a 3-0C. So he's gonna, or I in this case, I'm gonna activate these guys here. And this air unit will come down here. Battleship will participate. So let's just say he's in that hex there. I'm not going to stack him up. And this guy will come down here. So at this point, he's got 4 against my 19 in Battle A for air naval, and he's got 8 against my 19, because remember, there's 5 for the American Volunteer Group in there, even though he's not activated. So it's 8 against 19 in Battle B here. And in Battle A, I end up getting a 1x result, which will eliminate this unit. And he needed a crit to hit me and missed on that. So we will send that guy to the dead pool, and there's no further battle going on there. And then in Rangoon, I actually misspoke, because there's both the London and the American Volunteer Group. So there's 11 plus 14 is 25 here. And so what happens is that the Allies get a 1x result, which eliminates the Japanese unit, because remember, there's 2 steps in this unit. That's 20, but we had 25, so it's enough to eliminate both of those steps. But he also got a crit. And so first of all, let's send him to the dead pool. And then crit-wise, just looking at this closely, you'll see that a crit needs to go against the unit with the lowest defense strength. And so with the London being an 8 defense strength, then that's where the crit will need to go. So we flip that guy here. And that is over, and then we need to take a look at what happens in the ground combat in Rangoon, which is really what this turn, or this card play, was all about. Just checking modifiers for the ground battle at Rangoon. If we toggle off the pieces, you can see that that's clearly a jungle hex. That'll be -1. So he's got his 2 armies, so that's 36 at -1, and I've got 22 ground strength at no modifier. We end up with him rolling a 1x result and me rolling a 1x result as well. So 36 is enough to take 3 steps. So what that's going to do is that's going to, it'll flip both units first, obviously, because you've got to flip all units before you can eliminate anybody else. And then he'll go ahead and send that guy to the dead pool. And then I end up flipping one of his with my 1x result. But he's killed 3 of my steps to 1 of his, so he wins the combat. He'll retreat my Chinese guys. I'll have to do an emergency naval move out, and we'll wrap up the turn that way. But most importantly, he's taken Rangoon here, which is a big step forward for the Japanese in the CBI. Also, as we look at the final positions here after his offensive, at this point, with Rangoon having fallen and these transport routes up here not being built yet, the Burma Road is effectively cut. And there is no hump right now because that card hasn't been played. So that takes us from a -8 modifier on a China OC down to a 0 modifier on a China OC. So you can see that cutting the Burma Road is a big step, and in particular early in the game, before the transport routes have been built up here in the new 2nd edition version of the rules. Rangoon is really critical because taking Rangoon cuts that Burma Road. And also, actually, at that point, with no Burma Road and no hump, Kunming is not a supply source, so the Chinese units are also out of supply. Given that, for my next play, it feels like it's going to make sense to pull this card out of the hump. This is the China Airlift card. You'll recall that what that does is it makes the hump active. So we can flip this to the hump side, and with the Burma road closed but the hump in play, the modifier moves up to a -4, so, or down, depending on how you want to count it. So that's a good thing. And then we also get another bonus here, which is that either the AVG or the 14th Air Force, whichever is in play, gets a replacement step. And since it's the AVG, we'll just go ahead and flip them. So that's nice there. We are playing this as the event, which means it's going to be removed from the game. But it's really pretty much perfect timing that we had it in FO there. And then at this point, he's going to play the Tainan Air Unit. That's a special reinforcement counter that he's going to put down here in Medan. And what that does is, if we look at the ZOIs, that reestablishes the cutting of the line of communications between Australia and the CBI, so that if I were to have any thoughts of trying to send some reinforcements over there by strategic move, those are gone, at least for the moment. At this point, I've played defensively about all that I can in the CBI until he does something else over there. So it's time to get back on track towards my own progress of war goals. And if I pull up the hand, what I really want to do here is, if I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, that's great. So I'm looking at the Mao card here and thinking that that's going to be enough. If I play him on Anzac, I'll get 2 + 1 for Anzac is 3. And what I can do actually is, if I activate the Port Moresby Brigade, I can send him over to grab Woodlark. And let's actually just get rid of that Japanese control marker. So I can grab Woodlark there. That takes 1 ASP out of my 2. But that's good because it's going to be a progress of war there. And then what I want to do is I want to activate this guy here. And this is a 2 OC, which means I've got 2 movement points when moving on ground, which is great because that's pretty much what I need in New Guinea. And then I'm also going to bring along a little bit of air for support over there. So what I've done here is 2 things. I have taken my first progress of war that I was planning on, which is Woodlark, and then I've also moved the Australian Corps forward in prep to advance on my second progress of war. And you'll notice I've done that with Anzac, and again, Anzac in sort of turns 4 or 5, even into turn 6, is often your go-to HQ because of just the situation on the board and the units that you've got at your disposal. You'll find you're using Anzac quite a bit on turns 4, 5, and 6. At this point, the Japanese player decides to play the Panama Canal card. That is one of the interesting offensive draw cards. The primary effect is that it causes reinforcements to be delayed, which obviously is not particularly relevant here since I'm already delayed with war in Europe being deep south. But the other angle on the Panama Canal card is that it does give the player a draw. So he's really just playing that at this point. It's an offensive card that is giving him another draw that will allow him to play again later in the turn, and he's drawing to see what it is that he's going to be getting. After he does that, I decide it's time to go after my second and last progress of war. So again, that's going after Hollandia here. And let's take a quick look at the hand. So clearly, we're playing War in Europe and Booze as events. Booze is actually going to go into the FO. And so that leaves us these 3 cards here that we could use for this particular operation. This is a logistics value of 1, and it's a surprise attack, which we don't really need in this operation. This is an air attack only. It's not going to do me any good, because, at least not as an event, because I won't be able to activate ground units. So probably what I need is Hurricane Task Force. So let's pull this out. And the good news here is it can be used on any HQ. And let's see which HQ I'm going to want to use. So if I look at this, the ground unit is clearly going to be the 3rd Australian Corps. And then I'm going to want U.S. Air to support it. So that means I'm going to have to activate Anzac. And so Anzac will be 3 logistics value plus 1 is 4. So I'll get 3 more air units that I can activate. Actually, I don't want the LRB. I want the short range guys because they're a little bit stronger. So these guys will fly up to Madang here. And let's just zoom in a little bit more. So what I've got here then, and this guy's moving over land. And again, this is a 2 OC, and it costs them 2 to move 1 hex, so we're good there. So I've got 30 factors of air coming in support here. The Japanese are able to roll intercept, but decide not to react. And that's probably a good move here because the Allies, more than anything, want to trade air. The Japanese really do not want to trade with Allied air. And he can't keep me from capturing the hex because I'm moving over land. There's no way he's going to bring anything that's going to be able to stop me. So his best play is, even though he can intercept, he's just not going to do anything. And so what will happen is his guy here is killed in the combat. I get a 1x result, which does him in. And remember, the Allies are if there's U.S. air involved, the Allied air naval combat will get +1 in 1943. So he's dead. He needed a critical hit to hit one of my guys because he was only an 8. So that fails. And let's see, was there a Japanese? Yes, there was. Let's get rid of that. So we have just made our second progress of war here, and we've still got 1 ASP left, so that's all a good thing. Let's play that as the event. And then at this point, with cards left on both sides, the Japanese play to FO and as their next play, and then I play booze to FO as my next play. You'll recall we cleared out the FO earlier when we pulled the hump card out. And so let's just zoom out and send this guy over, stick him over on the side here. And then it's back to the Japanese player. He obviously wants to continue to play offensively in the CBI. So what he does is he plays a 3 OC here on south, and he's going to activate some of the units over here. And just keep in mind there's some special rules around activating units in the CBI North India area for the Japanese. Basically the 2 conditions are whether or not the Kwai Bridge has been played and whether or not Rangoon is Japanese controlled. And if neither of those conditions are met, that is, the Kwai Bridge has not been played and Rangoon is not Japanese controlled, then for the Japanese player to activate units in Burma or North India or Ceylon, they get a -1 activation penalty when they do that. If the Japanese have both events or both conditions met, that is, the Kwai Bridge has been played and Rangoon is in Japanese control, they get a +1 in that circumstance. This is a 1 yes, 1 no, right? So Rangoon is controlled by the Japanese, but the Kwai Bridge has not been played. And so in that situation, there's no bonus and no penalty. It's just a straight up 1 with a 3 OC gives him 4 activations over here. So you can see the 4 units that he's activating here. He's moved the reduced strength army from Rangoon forward to attack Mandalay, which is a declared battle hex. The air unit in Rangoon is supporting that. There's another air unit that's also moving up to support that. And then the Korean army in Chalatjap is moving by strategic ground transport to the Rangoon hex. And I always hate when it does that. Let's see. All right. In this case, again, obviously SEAC will be the reacting HQ. We only need, I think it was an 8 or less to make intel, so we're good there. Where it gets interesting here is the new supply rules. Let's just take a little bit of a closer look. I want to activate these 2 Chinese units and move them into the Mandalay hex if I can, because that might give me some chance of repelling the Japanese assault. The question is, are they in supply? They certainly are within HQ activation trace, so this is a good example of looking at where HQ activation trace and supply are not going to be the same thing, because we're tracing from SEAC over here, we're tracing activation from SEAC over here, and he can clearly trace through here There's no, don't think zone of controls in this game. There's no zones of control. Basically, if there's no land unit blocking land, or actually ground or air unit blocking a hex, you can go ahead and trace your activation right through it. Supply as well. But so activation, we're good. The problem with supply is we're a little bit too far. So over here, I'm just going to move the A over to show you. So that hex right there is Dhaka. That is a supply eligible port. Unfortunately, from Dhaka to the Chinese is 2, 4, 6 movement points. And you'll recall the overland logistical range limitation is 4 movement points from either from the HQ or from a supply eligible port. So let's put that back there. That represents the battle hex. But because, if we go back up here, recall the hump is active. And with the hump active, that means Kunming is a supply source again. And so actually we are able to trace a half, 1, 1.5, 2, because Kunming counts as basically, in this case, it's the equivalent of an supply eligible port for the purposes of overland logistics range. And so the really interesting part is you can say, well, obviously this is a half and this is a half because those are strategic transport routes, but there's a battle going on here. How does that work? So the answer is, for supply purposes, you continue, if you have a friendly unit in the hex, could be either ground or air, then you can still trace supply at a half movement point. But movement is different. If you're moving into a hex that's got an enemy unit, you got to pay full movement point cost. But supply trace goes through there at the speedier rate. So these guys actually are in supply with the new supply rules. So that means they're able to react into the hex here. And then in addition, I'm going to activate a couple of air units here, that guy and that guy. And if we look at the air-naval battle, again, the Japanese have 40, and I've got, I have 4 here for the Far East air unit. I have 10, so that's 14, including SEAC. And then if we look at the hex, I've got another 6 for the AVG, even though it's not activated, it's in the battle hex. So I've got 20. So it's 40 for the Japanese, 20 for me. I got lucky in this particular battle. I rolled a 1 times result, so that's going to cause both of the Japanese units to flip here. The Japanese rolled a 1/4 result, so that's 10 on 40 attack factors. So they have a choice, and they go ahead and decide to flip that unit there. I think because so they can't flip FE, right? Because FE is already flipped, so they have to flip either SEAC or the AVG. Since AVG can't take a replacement, they'll go ahead and flip that one. Then if we look at the ground battle, it's 9 for the Japanese with a -1 modifier for the jungle. It's 7 for the Chinese. The Japanese roll a 1 times result, so 9 doesn't do any damage to either of those units because they're both 12 defense. I miss on mine, and so with no damage on either side, then the attacker it's a tied result, and the defender wins a tie. The attacker has to retreat. So that's what will happen there. So looking at this situation after post-battle movement, I see that there's still not really anything that it makes sense spending a card on defensively over here in the CBI. So we want to go back and take a look at what's happening in the Pacific Theater. And as I'm looking at this, I'm seeing that he's got a couple of good units, an air unit and a naval unit at BIAC, that are now within normal range of the Hollandia hex. So I'm thinking that this is probably a good time to go ahead and play Chennault. Remember, he's an air units only. It's going to be a logistics value of 4. I don't actually need to activate any Commonwealth units here, so I could use him on Southwest. That would give me 6 total activations. So if I look at this, let's think about activating these 3 guys here, and these 3 guys here. And what will happen is these guys will come up here to attack BIAC. And then the long-range bombers will start a long-range bombing campaign against truck. So basically this LRB here, this LRB here, and this LRB will fly up to Bougainville, and they will all make a strike against truck there. So the reaction will come from truck. They succeed. I think they needed a 6 or less on the die here. And so South Seas will be 2 + 2 for 4, so they activate this air unit at Kavieng, flies to Admiralty to participate in this battle at long range over here. And then we've got a couple more air units. This guy can go here, down to here. Remember, you can't fly into a battle hex. He would be participating from long range at Guam, but he can fly from Guam down to Ponape. So at this point, this is how the two battles are shaping up. And over in the battle at Biak, I've got 30 with a +1 modifier for U.S. Air in 1943. He's got 28 in the hex plus another 5 because this guy's halved at long range, so he's got 33. So you can see where he's going there is trying to, if he gets a 1x result, make sure he can flip 3 of my units. And as it turned out, it was a half times result that I got on him, and he had a quarter times result on me. So half of 30 is 15. I can basically flip one of his units, and I go ahead and flip this guy here because it's one of the elite air units that can't be replaced. So that's always a good thing. And with his 33, a quarter of that is only 8, so that's not enough to do any damage on me. Even actually 8, it's rounded up to 9 because you round up fractions here. Over here, it's a little bit of a different story. In this case, a truck, I've only got 12 because I've got 3 long-range bombers at 4 each. They're also +1 for U.S. Air in 1943. He's got 48. He's got 30 participating at range, and then he's got the Soryu and the Kamikaze in here, so he's got a total of 48. Unfortunately, on this one, I roll a 1 times result, so I'm able to, I've got 12, which is just enough to flip the Soryu, and he rolls another 1/4 result, and so he does 12 on me, which is enough to flip one of my air units, and I think he flips the 10th Air Force here. So that could have gone worse for me, but ultimately, you know, as the Allies, you really should feel reasonably comfortable trading your air in situations where you've got a good opportunity to do some damage to the other guy, because you're getting 5 air replacements a turn, so you should be trying to burn those as much as you possibly can. These are the positions here at the end of post-battle movement, and the one thing that's changed is that actually the 28th Air Force did return to Rabaul instead of Kavieng, so it's now a little bit better positioned here, but only after I completed my successful progress of war there, so we got that out of the way just in time. And I forgot to mention that the other benefit of playing the Chenal card is that the 14th Air Force comes in over here somewhere in the CBI or the China box, and that replaces the American Volunteer Group, so I have to send those guys away. But that's all right because we were down a step there anyway. Now we've got a full strength unit that's actually replaceable, so we should be in good shape here. He continues to push into CBI with his next card. He's activating a couple of armies at Rangoon. They're moving forward to attack Mandalay. He's basically playing a counteroffensive that's a 3OC as the OC, so he's got enough movement to hike up the road to Mandalay there. This guy comes over 1, 2 legs, and this guy down at Chalachap comes up to backfill at Rangoon there. Then things get interesting. We're playing this in ACTS, so I'm rolling. First I roll for intel, and I roll a 9 for intel. Then I roll for his air bombardment. Since I can't react having rolled a 9 for intercept, he actually gets to make an air bombardment where he needs a crit to hit something. So he does. I roll another 9 for him, and so those Chinese go to the dead pool. And then in the ground combat, I roll another 9 for him. So that guy goes to the dead pool as well. So can't complain here. I've had plenty of good rolls in the game, but that was kind of funny seeing 3 9s in a row there. This guy PBM's back to Medan. And at this point, things are definitely going downhill in Burma pretty quickly. It's back to me here, and if we look at what I have left in my hand, just 2 cards, War in Europe and the surprise attack. And as I think about the turn, I went first, and so he, with both of us having 7 cards, so he's going to get the last play to begin with, and then he actually had an offensive draw with the Panama Canal card, which is going to give him another card at the end. So he's actually going to get 2 last plays. So there's not really any point in hanging on to the War in Europe card thinking that I can outlast him, because he's going to have 2 cards left when I'm done. So it just makes more sense to go ahead and play this, get it out of the way. So I'm going to play that as the event. That will have the effect of moving me up 1 more. Feels like very slow progress, but when you're that far down in War in Europe, you got to take whatever you can get. So that is my next to last play there. He continues his push in the CBI. He's got a card, it's the Doolittle Raid Reprisal, which is an interesting China event card. It's conditional. It can only be played if the Doolittle Raid has been played, which it hasn't. So he can't play the card as a China event, but he can play it as an OC, which he does. So he plays that as a 2 OC on south, so he can activate 3 units. This guy here can move via strategic ground transport up to Rangoon. And then this reduced army will move 1, 1.5, 2. So he's basically taken. So let's clone a couple of control markers. So at this point, he's effectively conquered Rangoon. This guy goes, this guy, let's do this. The Koreans move forward like that. And so he's essentially conquered Rangoon and moved into North India with that play. At this point, I've only got 1 card left. It's Operation Brewer. It's a surprise attack if I play it on Southwest. And so I'm thinking that I don't really need it to do anything with. In fact, I've still got 1 amphibious shipping point that I haven't spent. But I'm thinking right now about trying to do as much damage as possible. So I'm looking at BIAC and thinking that if I can bring in all 3 of these guys here, and remember, played as the event, it's got a logistics value of only 1, so 1 plus 2 for Southwest will allow me to activate 3. So I can activate all 3 of those air units and move them in here, and so I'll have 30 going against BIAC. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, he has not played well, actually, he did play a counteroffensive card as an OC, but I have not seen a code change card this turn, and I know that he's still got probably, I think, 5 or 6 in the draw pile, and so he pulls 1 out at this point, which cancels my surprise attack, allows him to activate a couple of extra units here. He could have activated more, but he chose just to activate these 2 here, flew them both into Admiralty. They can't really get close range or normal range. So we end up with 20 in the hex, plus 5 and 5. So he's got 30 total, and I've got 30 as well. I'm going to have my +1 as the US in 43, and we both end up with a 1 times result at this point. And so since we both got 30 and we both roll 1 times results, then there's an awful lot of flipping going on here. So let's flip that. Those 3 guys all flip, and his 3 unreduced guys all flip. So there's a fair amount of damage there, which from my perspective is just great. Would have been nice to have surprise and not take any damage, but the main thing was to try and get a 1 times result and do as many steps on him as I can. I know my air is going to be coming back in replacements, and most of his isn't, so that's a good deal from my perspective. Units will go back to their starting locations. So those are the PBM positions there. At this point, I'm out of cards. You recall, he was still going to have 2 plays left. Now, he did play his code change card as an intercept, but that's a card that allows a draw, so he's still got 2 cards left to play. And the first one he plays is the Indian Workers' Strike card. It's the one that has 2 effects. If North India is already completely occupied, then it will have the impact of moving the India track 1 to the left, wherever it happens to be at that moment. because North India is not occupied at this point, it will not have that effect. But the other good effect for him is that it reduces my ground replacements by 1 step next turn. Normally I would have 2, so in the replacement stage coming up, I'm only going to have 1. And the one I have can't be used in the CBI. And if you look at the dead pool here, you'll see I've got actually this nice British core that I would love to, with 2 replacement points, I could bring that back and he could participate in the defense of northern India. Unfortunately, I'm going to lose 1 replacement point and I won't be able to spend the other one on him. So I'm going to have to fight next turn with exactly the steps I've got up here. So things are starting to not look terribly good in North India at this point. So that's his next to last play. And then for his last play, he plays a China event as a 2OC here to do a little bit of shuffling, and he moves the reduced army in Saigon over to Davao. Then he backfills Saigon with the one at Medan. And then he also takes the ED army and moves that up the turnpike to Mandalay. So at this point, we're end of turn 5. We're through the first part of 1943. I was feeling reasonably good about the CBI over here until his play of the Indian Workers' Strike, which is going to make things a lot harder to defend next turn. The flip side is he was behind on his Indian timetable anyway due to his early card situation. If I look at the Pacific Theater, you know, for early 1943, not too bad shape. Instead of Guadalcanal, we've got Bougainville here. We've got a solid base there. We're probably a little further up the coast in New Guinea than we might normally be. Other than that, the situation is pretty much about what you'd expect for this point in the game. That's it for Act 1 of this little drama. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please join me for Act 2.